Hello YouTube, my name is Isabella and I just spent the past hour filming my wrap up to figure out that it was out of focus and that my hair was in a middle part. So we're refilming this. I also hated what I was saying, it just wasn't flowing properly. So hopefully me going through my thoughts, I guess as a dry run, hopefully this round will be better, but I don't have hope. I read 12 things in the month of March, and as I said so many times in the wrap-up that will never see the light of day, it was a mixed month. I read a lot of really great things, had a span of like giving out 5 4-star, really high ratings, and then sandwiched between those are poor and poor ratings. So maybe not, that's a bit dramatic, but I had a lot of disappointments this month too, so we're going to talk about them all. I did not fully complete my TBR, so if you're interested, I will have my newest version of my TBR game linked if you want to know what my punishment and all that stuff is. But for the most part, I read most of the books I mentioned. I think I participated in Tome Topple, sort of. I didn't get to participate as much as I wanted to because just like time limitations. Moving on to the first book I read in March, which was We Free the Stars by Hafsa Faizal. This is the sequel and finale to We Hunt the Flame, a book that I've had very mixed thoughts on and have reviewed and talked about at length, so I will have that link down below. This follows two main characters, Zafira, who is a huntress who has to keep her identity a secret because she is forbidden to do what she does, and the Crown Prince Nasir, who's also a very feared assassin. They are sent on a quest separately to retrieve a lost magical item and cross paths with one another and kind of join together with a motley crew to attempt to achieve their goals. Content warnings for this include death, violence and gore, sexism, and maiming. This was not a good sequel or finale, in my opinion. I'm disappointed with it basically from start to finish. I think the construction of the story was flawed. It's nearly 600 pages and absolutely did not need to be that long. The first 100 pages added nothing to the story. It was just sort of rehashing a ton of stuff that we knew and did not further the story at all. I also got really frustrated with the characters because many times throughout this story I found the characters to act out of character just to further the plot along and to further along conflicts. That was incredibly frustrating and not a satisfying reading experience. I also like Hafsa's prose a lot. Her descriptions are very nice, but when action scenes happen, I find them very difficult to keep track of because it's just there's just not enough described there, and I had that complaint with the first book as well. Ultimately, I gave this 2 stars. I'm very disappointed by it. It wasn't a fun time. I was hoping for more and didn't really get it. The next thing I read was Ring Shout by Pete Jelly Clark. This is set in 1915 and the birth of a nation is at its height and peak popularity, and it also happens to be cursed. Basically, hate-filled, disgusting human beings are turned into hate-filled Ku Klux monsters who are set to try and take over the world throughout the ranks of the KKK. Our main character is basically set on a mission to stop them because if not, the world is going to end. And what we get is a fantastic, well-paced, engaging from start to finish novella that I definitely think is worth your time. Content warnings include violence, death and murder, gore, body horror, and racism. I think this is a fantastic example of a novella done right. It is so well suited to the length, its length. Nothing feels rushed or shoehorned in. It has ebbs and flows. It's paced phenomenally well, and we get to know our characters so well for such a short thing. I also loved the writing and the tone of the story because it's very dark and upsetting, but also there's bits of levity in there. I actually ended up laughing out loud a couple times because of the character that I just thought was so funny. I loved the visuals and all the description in here. It was so vivid that honestly, when we were getting to the gross stuff, I was grossed out. The body horror shit, the way it was described was grossing me the fuck out. But I think it's done excellently. I gave it 5 full stars. Really, really loved the book. I have sort of unofficially been doing a reread a month for 2020. It wasn't a part of my official goals, but here we are. And the book I reread in March was Truthwitch by Susan Dennard. It was the first book I read in 2020, but I wanted to continue on with this series and realized I just didn't remember enough about it. This follows 2 main characters, Safi and Isolt. Safi is a truth witch, which means she can discern truth from lie, and because of such an amazing power, if her secret was to get out, she would be the most sought person basically in their entire world. Isolt is a thread witch. She can see the threads that bind one another, and at the very beginning of the story, a con of theirs goes incredibly wrong, and they set off a series of events that neither of them could have ever expected. Content warnings include death and ableism/discrimination. I love this story. I'm loving this series, and I'm pleased to say it really holds up upon reread. I was a little nervous about that, but I loved it just as much as the first time. I could really see what Susan Dennard was setting up. I also absolutely love the emphasis on female friendship. It's such a joy to read a book series that is so focused on these 2 young women and their wonderful friendship. I gave this 5 stars again. I then picked up my arc for the month, and that was Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. I'm 99% sure this is set to come out in May, and I think it's something to keep on your radar if you're interested. It's sort of pitched as a genre-bending gothic story in which a pregnant teen is escaping a cult-like place, and she basically is trying to live in the forest and raise her 2 children when the grip and claws of this horrific place kind of keep drawing her back. Content warnings include, it's a long one, mentions of self-harm, rape and sexual assault of a child, homophobia, pregnancy and birth, death, murder and gore, body horror, mass killings, experimentation, torture, and racism. Genre bending is a very accurate way to describe this story. I could probably lob about 5 different genres at it, and one way or the other they would stick and actually make sense. There's some phenomenal writing in here. River Solomon has such a unique and interesting point of view and way of writing stories. I love the writing and imagery described in here. Our characters are incredibly vivid and leap off the page. I think you can tell that this is River Solomon's first full-length story because the pacing is slightly uneven to my tastes, but that's really my only complaint in here. I think Vern was such an interesting character, and watching her progression and her deciding to reclaim and use what was done to her, it was such an interesting journey to witness, and honestly I'm really grateful that I read and requested this book. The second I started reading, I was sucked in. I couldn't get enough of this story. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is definitely a standout story. I also really recommend this one. I then finally let myself read Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. The second it arrived on my doorstep, I wanted to read it, but I made myself finish some things first to then give myself just the treat and joy that Talia Hibbert's Brown Sister series has been. This is the 3rd and final book in the companion series. It follows Eve Brown, the youngest of the Brown sisters. She is what her family would describe as a hot mess. She can never really stick to a job or a career path, and then her family threatens her with cutting her off, saying, nope, you gotta get a job, gotta get your life together. She then interviews to be the cook at a bed and breakfast, and subsequently hits the owner with her car. And of course, romance then ensues. Content warnings include anti-autistic ableism and explicit sex. This has a couple dynamics I'm discovering I really like, especially the grumpy sunshine thing. I loved witnessing the 2 of them in their interactions, because our main male character kind of begrudgingly likes her, and he is all grumpy and stoic, but she brings out a lot of light and joy to his life, and watching them interact and slowly start to fall in love was truly a joy to read. I loved how much respect was brought to their relationship and how well they listened to one another. They are a couple I will remember for a long time. I did not love the third act problem in here, especially because it seemed brought on by previous characters who I love acting really, really odd and sort of out of sorts. The sex scenes were off the charts fantastic. I loved their interactions altogether. This romance was really sweet. I really also enjoyed Eve's journey, specifically of self-love and self-acceptance. I'm sad this series is over, but I like who we're kind of hinted at that I think Talia Hibbert might be reading or writing next for her next venture, and I'm excited about that. I gave this 4 stars. The next book I completed, I have incredibly conflicting thoughts about, and I'm disappointed, and it's not even my own fault. It is the fault of the audiobook. I'm sticking with that. The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I was so dying to read this book. I thought I was going to absolutely love it, and I liked it, but I don't think the audiobook is very great. And honestly, this experience stuck out to me so much that I've been inspired to do a whole new video series on my channel. So that's interesting. Essentially, I listened to the first half and then switched to the physical book for the second half because I didn't like the narrator and it was really affecting my enjoyment of the story. I don't know how to pitch this book to you because I think the summary gives way too much away for how short this book is. It's just 300 pages, and the summary on Goodreads and on the back of this book, the plot doesn't really further from that, at least 150 pages in. So wintry vibes, fantasy Russia, Gods Walk Among Us. That's all I'm going to say. Content warnings for this include death via childbirth, sexual assault, and misogyny. I love the elements of the Russian folklore, all the different creatures that we interact with. Vasya as a main character is fantastic. I love her and loved watching her plight because she isn't necessarily satisfied with what people want her to do. She does not want to conform to that because it's just not what she wants. She wants something different for her life, and watching her slowly start to accept that, start to trust in herself more throughout the course of the story was wonderful. I loved watching that arc, and I can't wait to see where her arc goes over the course of the trilogy. I'm very excited for the sequels. I do think it takes, again, a little while for the plot to really get rolling. I think the intro could have been cut a little bit shorter. I gave this a solid 4 stars. I think I could still love this and increase this rating upon reread and upon reading the rest of the trilogy, but currently it is a 4-star. I don't want to talk about this next book because it was a big fat disappointment. I also was dying to read this book. I was planning on reading it the second it landed on my doorstep, but I was like, nope, save it for Tome Topple. You want to participate, you want to chat with people. It's going to be a fun time. And it kind of blew up in my face. I read Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare and was really disappointed by it. I have already posted a mild rant if you're interested specifically on why I dislike this so much. Content warnings for it include alcoholism, death and loss of a loved one, manipulation, and abuse. I think this is basically a giant retread of every single plot point we have seen in any other Cassandra Clare series ever. It was not enough for it to be its full, for it to be a full completed book. It's almost 700 pages of nothing. I did like the domestic and quieter character moments, but that is not enough to, again, support a 700-page book full of nothing. This needed an editor, desperately needed an editor. And it basically just seemed entirely like a book meant for setup and fodder for the final book, the concluding story. And I'm disappointed. I gave it 2 stars. We're going to continue on with the I'm disappointed by it train to talk about Leviathan Wakes by James S. A. Corey. This is a plot twist. I did not expect to kind of be disappointed by this book. we're going to chat why. I actually am supposed to be filming my review for this right after this video, so hopefully I can do that. This is the first book in an epic sci-fi space opera series that's set to span 9 books. Basically, a character is set on a small mission to see what's happening on a ship that is putting out a distress call. What he discovers will change the face of the intergalactic community, and war happens. Content warnings for this include disease/infection, murder, mentions of abuse, assault, and rape, gun violence, and suicidal ideation. It wasn't as successful as I would have liked it to be. It almost felt like a 0.5. I thought our characters were incredibly flat. The plot was okay, and I was interested to see how the story was going to continue. I liked a lot of the bio-warfare kind of stuff going on. I thought that was interesting and new. I just had a lot of issues with the construction of the story and the way the authors chose to tell it, and I will explain that in my review, which I will have linked down below when it goes live. I gave this 3 stars. I'm disappointed. Oh, damn it. I thought I was almost done. Forgot I read a couple ebooks. Okay. I read 2 parts of the Binti series by Nnedi Okorafor, Binti 1.5 Sacred Fire, and Binti number 2 Home. If you're interested in reading the short story, like 1.5, it is in the ebook novella bind up. That's where I read it. I didn't know it was on there until I started or went to read part 2. It is incredibly short. It's like 35 pages, and it doesn't even have a cover. But I actually really loved it and loved what it brought to the table. I loved all the topics of discussion in there with grief and discussions of like bodily autonomy. It also did a really good job reminding me what happened in the first book because it had been over a year since I'd read it. I love Nnedi Okorafor's themes. I loved what this discussed. I gave it 4 stars. Really enjoyed Binti Sacred Fire. Binti Home, however, I also really liked, but it didn't exactly deliver on what I personally wanted, so I was like slightly let down. I still think it's good though. Content warnings for Binti include violence, gun violence, grief, and PTSD. Frankly, I wanted a little bit more of like the space stuff, and where the plot goes, I wanted it to go in a different direction or explore different things. But I think the way Nnedi Okorafor explores them is very well done. Her themes are great, discussing acceptance and grief, PTSD, again, bodily autonomy. What do you do when something was done to you when you didn't consent to it? That is a very main driving factor of this story, and I liked a lot of the way she went to discover it. For novella, I thought it was honestly a little slow, but I do think it sort of is going to bridge the gap between books 1 and 3, and I'm really excited to see what happens in book 3. I gave it 3.5 stars. Did really enjoy it. Was hoping for a little more, but I will be continuing on and finishing out the series hopefully very soon. I then read is it my first graphic novel of the year? If so, wow, it's taken me a while, but Amulet Volume 1 by Kazu Kibushi. This is a middle grade graphic novel series. It opens with our main character witnessing the death of her father in a car-related accident, and they then move to her mom's childhood home to discover a magical artifact that sends her sort of on a quest. Content warnings include a car crash, death of a parent, and more death. This is shockingly dark, or a lot darker than I expected it to be for the age range, but I think it treats all of the topics and things discussed appropriately, but also doesn't shy away from some of the things that our 2 characters are experiencing. It was quite a fun surprise to me. I liked where the story was going. I loved the imagery. I loved the different various creatures we meet. The artwork is gorgeous. I loved how, again, dark the artwork was, and some of the visuals are actually kind of creepy. I really liked the themes focusing on like familial love and relationships. I gave it a really high 4 stars. I am very excited and intrigued to continue on with the series. The final thing I read, I plan to include a clip of me talking about it later on because I'm filming this on the 31st, and before I had 100 pages left of this book, but I then finished it getting ready this morning for the day and don't exactly know how I feel about it yet. And I guess, you know what, let's cut to the chase. It's The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. It took me 2 weeks to friggin' complete, and I have been kind of vlogging my experience reading it, and I plan, I think, to do a sort of review at the end if you're interested. But it's kind of a hot mess. You can kind of definitely see its age. You can see that this is the first book that I think Robert Jordan ever wrote. In theory, I like the idea of a very epic fantasy, a world that's very developed and has all of like the histories. It's a sprawling scope. There's a big bad, you know, the classic epic fantasy. But this as a book, as the first entry to a series, is incredibly weak. The characters are so flat. The way that Robert Jordan chose to write this was interesting, to say the least. I don't understand why we have a main character. We get his perspective for 300 pages. Then the perspectives finally switch, which I was so glad. I was like, yes. And then once certain plot things occur, we're back to only his perspective. Are you kidding? And the amount of plot conveniences in here should be criminal. Initially thought I was going to give this about 3 stars before I finished it, and the more I've been thinking about it, the more it's been like 2.5, 2, 1.5. Like, I don't know, and still have to sort of officially parse my thoughts out. I still might continue on with the series though, because I'm curious, and hopefully maybe the problems were really just with book number 1. So that is it for me discussing all the books I read in March. Again, I can't believe I filmed the whole thing. Like 50 minutes of me filming to scrap it all. It's a very sad morning. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite read in March was, or if you have any thoughts on any of the books I mentioned. I'd love to know. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.